The morning sun slanted through the Venetian blinds of courtroom 4B, casting prison bar shadows across Judge Sarah Whitman's polished mahogany bench. 23 years on the bench had taught her to read people, but something about this morning's case file made her pause. A small USB drive sat innocuously beside it, delivered by courthouse security just minutes before the session began. Next case, Bennett versus Thompson, noise complaint and neighborhood disturbance, her clerk announced, voice echoing through the half-empty courtroom. Marissa Thompson entered, her blue medical scrubs slightly wrinkled from what was clearly a long night shift. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. The defendant's fingers kept straying to her phone, checking it with the anxious automaticity of someone who couldn't afford to miss a call. Judge Whitman noticed the hospital ID still clipped to her scrubs. Memorial General, Emergency Department. Miss Thompson, I see you're coming straight from work, Judge Whitman observed, her tone neutral but understanding. The young woman's head snapped up, surprise flickering across her features at being addressed directly. Yes, Your Honor. Double shift in the ER. I'm sorry I couldn't change, but I didn't want to be late. Thompson's voice was soft but clear, educated but tired. So tired. The courtroom doors swung open again, and Eleanor Bennett made her entrance. Even at 68, she commanded attention. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer outfit, pearls that caught the morning light. She clutched a designer handbag close to her chest like armor, and Judge Whitman didn't miss how she deliberately chose the seat furthest from Thompson. Mrs. Bennett, you filed the noise complaint against Miss Thompson. Judge Whitman adjusted her reading glasses, studying the meticulously prepared documentation before her. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. A small voice whispered in the back of her mind. Indeed, Your Honor. Bennett's voice quavered masterfully. I hate to be a bother, but the constant noise, it's become unbearable. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. At my age, sleep is precious, and the music, the parties, night after night. Thompson's head shot up. That's not true. I work nights. I'm barely even. Miss Thompson, Judge Whitman interrupted gently. You'll have your chance to respond. Please continue, Mrs. Bennett. The elderly woman produced a tablet, her manicured fingers trembling just enough to be noticeable. I have videos, Your Honor. The noise levels, recorded from my apartment, and police reports. They'd been called 3 times this month alone. The evidence was damning. Crystal clear recordings of thumping bass lines at 3 a.m., multiple noise complaints filed by other neighbors, police reports documenting the disturbances. Thompson's face grew increasingly desperate as each piece of evidence mounted against her. When it was finally Thompson's turn to speak, exhaustion seemed to overwhelm her. Your Honor, I'm a single mother. I work emergency medicine, night shifts. When would I even have time to throw parties? I sleep when I'm not saving lives. She reached for her phone again, checking it reflexively. I'm sorry. We're short-staffed, and if there's a trauma call. Ms. Thompson, do you have any evidence to counter these claims? Judge Whitman asked, already knowing the answer. The young woman's shoulders slumped. Just my word, Thompson whispered. And lately, that doesn't seem to count for much. Judge Whitman studied the 2 women before her. Bennett, the picture of wounded gentility, and Thompson, exhausted but unbowed. Something felt off, but the evidence was clear. Law over instinct, it was the foundation of her career. Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing a fine of $500 for repeated noise violations. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. As Thompson gathered her things, her whispered words barely reached the bench. You've given her exactly what she wanted. Her eyes met the judge's for just a moment, filled not with anger but with a bone-deep weariness that spoke of battles fought alone. Judge Whitman watched Thompson leave, noticed how Bennett's concerned expression slipped just for a second into something else, something that made the judge's instincts scream. She looked down at the USB drive still sitting on her desk, unopened. Sometimes justice arrived in unexpected packages. She picked up the drive, wondering why her hand trembled slightly as she did so. The real story was about to begin. Judge Sarah Whitman couldn't shake the unease that followed her into her chambers after the hearing. She found herself replaying Mrs. Bennett's testimony, analyzing it with the same scrutiny she'd applied to thousands of cases before. But this time, something gnawed at her judicial instincts. "Your Honor?" Her clerk, David, appeared at the door with a fresh cup of coffee. "Mrs. Bennett is still outside. Says she wants to thank you personally." He hesitated, then added, "She's crying again." Whitman suppressed a sigh. In 23 years on the bench, she'd seen every variation of tears, genuine, manipulative, and everything in between. Bennett's performance in the courtroom had been polished, almost too polished. "Send her in, David." Whitman straightened the files on her desk, including Thompson's case folder, deliberately leaving it visible. Eleanor Bennett glided in, dabbing at her eyes with that same monogrammed handkerchief. "Judge Whitman, I just wanted to express my gratitude. You have no idea what this means to someone my age, finally getting a peaceful night's sleep." "Mrs. Bennett," Whitman gestured to a chair, studying the older woman carefully. "Please sit. I noticed you've lived in the Oakwood Commons for just over 8 months." "Yes, after my dear Herbert passed." Bennett's voice caught perfectly on her late husband's name. "The neighborhood used to be so different." The slight pause spoke volumes. "Different?" Whitman prompted, watching Bennett's perfectly manicured fingers grip her designer handbag tighter. "Oh, you know." Bennett's eyes darted to the door, checking if it was closed. "More refined. These young people today, they have no respect for their elders. Especially," she let the word hang, heavy with unspoken implications. Judge Whitman felt her jaw tighten. "Especially." "Well," Bennett leaned forward conspiratorially. "Let's be honest, Your Honor. Some people just weren't raised with our values. That Thompson woman, working all hours, leaving her child alone. What kind of mother does that? A single mother working as an emergency room nurse during a healthcare staffing crisis." Whitman replied evenly, watching Bennett's facade crack slightly before smoothing over. Of course, Bennett backpedaled smoothly. "I'm sure she means well. But the noise, the disruption to the community. Something had to be done." As if on cue, Bennett produced more papers from her designer bag. "I took the liberty of documenting other incidents. The strange men visiting at odd hours. Probably her friends." The way she said friends dripped with insinuation. The garbage left outside her door. The loud phone conversations on her balcony. Whitman accepted the papers, noting how meticulously they were organized. Each incident logged with military precision. Dates, times, photographs. The work of someone with too much time and too much focus on a single neighbor. "Mrs. Bennett," Whitman interrupted the flowing litany of complaints, "are you familiar with the term harassment?" Bennett's perfectly lined eyes widened in practiced innocence. "Harassment? Why, I'm the victim here, Your Honor." "That woman." Her voice broke right on cue. "Do you know what it's like to feel unsafe in your own home?" The performance was masterful, Whitman had to admit. If she hadn't caught that split-second look of triumph when the fine was announced, if she hadn't seen Thompson's defeated resignation. "Thank you for bringing these additional incidents to my attention," Whitman said carefully, watching Bennett preen at the perceived victory. "I'll make sure they're properly filed." As Bennett rose to leave, she paused at the door. "You know, Judge Whitman, it's so refreshing to meet someone who understands, someone who knows how to keep our communities safe." The emphasis on that last word sent a chill down Whitman's spine. After Bennett left, Whitman sat in silence, staring at the USB drive still untouched on her desk. She thought of Thompson's exhausted eyes, of Bennett's calculated tears, of all the times justice had worn a perfectly respectable face while hiding something darker underneath. She reached for the USB drive just as David appeared again at her door, his face unusually serious. "Your Honor." There's something you need to see. Someone from Memorial General dropped off some security footage. It's about the Thompson case. The piece of technology in her hand suddenly felt much heavier. Sometimes, Whitman reflected, justice arrived with perfect timing. Judge Whitman's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the USB drive into her computer. David hovered by her desk, his usual professional demeanor tinged with concern. The hospital security guard who dropped this off. He seemed pretty shaken up, Your Honor. The folder opened to reveal dozens of video files, each meticulously dated and time-stamped. Whitman clicked on the most recent one, dated just 3 days ago. The security footage was crystal clear, high-definition cameras recently installed in the apartment complex's hallways as part of a safety upgrade. 2:47 a.m. Marissa Thompson trudged down the hallway in her scrubs, clearly exhausted after another ER shift. As she fumbled for her keys, Eleanor Bennett's door cracked open slightly. The timestamp showed Thompson entering her apartment, closing her door quietly. 3:02 a.m. Bennett emerged from her apartment, looking nothing like the frail woman who'd stood in court. She moved with purpose, carrying a small speaker. The audio picked up a faint muttering. "Let's see how you like this, you worthless." The rest was lost as she set up the speaker in the hallway, precisely angled toward Thompson's door. "My God," David whispered as they watched Bennett start playing music at full volume, her phone already recording the noise. 5 minutes later, she quickly gathered her equipment when distant footsteps approached, the security guard doing his rounds. But it was the next video that made Judge Whitman's coffee cup slip from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Thompson's young daughter skipped down the hallway, returning from getting the mail. Bennett intercepted her, blocking her path. The audio was painfully clear. "Look who it is. The little troublemaker." Bennett's voice dripped with venom. "Tell your mother we don't want your kind here. This used to be a nice neighborhood before you people moved in." The little girl's voice quavered. "Please let me pass, Mrs. Bennett. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble? Your whole existence is trouble. Just like your mother, thinking she's so special with her nurse's uniform. Nothing but a..." Bennett spat out a racial slur that made both Whitman and David flinch. The footage continued, showing similar incidents spanning months. Bennett playing music, then calling the police. Bennett scratching her own car in the parking lot, then filing a complaint against Thompson. Bennett following Thompson's daughter home from the school bus, recording her on her phone while muttering threats. "There's more, Your Honor," David said quietly, pointing to another folder labeled Previous Residents. The pattern was clear. Security footage from the past 8 months showed 3 other families, all minorities, who'd moved out after similar harassment campaigns. Bennett's methods were calculated, cruel, and deliberate. A final video began playing automatically. The timestamp showed it was from just hours after the court hearing. Bennett stood in the hallway with another resident, an elderly white woman from the 5th floor. "See, it's easy," Bennett gloated, waving the court order. "You just need to know how to play the system." The judge bought it completely. These literal courts, they have to pretend to be fair, but deep down. She patted her designer handbag. "I've got 6 more cases ready to go. By Christmas, we'll have our building back." Judge Whitman sat back, her face ashen. "David, get me everything we have on Bennett's previous addresses, and find out who sent this footage." "Already did, Your Honor." He placed a note on her desk. "The sender wants to remain anonymous, but they left this message. Check Memorial General's ER security footage from last night. See who really had a party." Within minutes, they were watching hospital surveillance video. There was Thompson, working frantically to save a car crash victim at exactly 3 a.m., the same time Bennett had claimed she was hosting a wild party. The timestamp was undeniable. "Your Honor," David's voice was hesitant. "There's something else. Mrs. Bennett's previous address. She lived in Riverside Commons until last year. 3 discrimination lawsuits were filed against the management company while she was head of the Residents Association, All the complainants eventually moved out. Judge Whitman stood up, her decision made. Get me Judge Martinez in criminal court. Now. And David, find Ms. Thompson. Tell her to bring her daughter. They need to be here for what happens next. Justice was about to be served, and this time, there would be no perfectly practiced tears to hide behind. The conference room in Judge Whitman's chambers had become a war room. Files, photographs, and documents covered every surface as she and a team of investigators pieced together Eleanor Bennett's carefully constructed facade. Look at this, Detective Lisa Chen said, spreading out a series of rental applications. 8 different apartment complexes in 3 years. Each time, she moves in as the sweet elderly widow. Within months, minority residents start moving out. Judge Whitman studied Bennett's employment history. 25 years as a legal secretary at Harrison & Mills. She knows exactly how to work the system. She picked up a journal, one of 12 identical volumes discovered in Bennett's storage unit, and she documented everything. The journal entries were chilling in their methodical precision. April 15. New target moved in. 4B single mother, nurse, 1 child. Begin phase 1. Documentation. Set up cameras in hallway to track movements. Research child's school schedule. April 20. Noise complaint filed. Police responded but no citation. Note: next time increase bass levels on speaker system. Officers respond better to vibration evidence. May 1. Connected with Janet in 5A. She's one of us. Taught her the documentation system. $500 for the lesson. Cash only. Her target is the Hispanic family in 5C. There's more, Detective Chen said grimly, opening her laptop. We found her private YouTube channel. She's been selling tutorials. The video showed Bennett, perfectly coiffed as always, addressing the camera with a practiced smile. Welcome to Community Preservation Strategies. Today's lesson: how to legally remove undesirable elements from your neighborhood. Remember, it's not about race. That's illegal. It's about quality of life violations. She winked at the camera. Judge Whitman felt sick. How many subscribers? Over 3,000. And she's been charging for private consultations. We found payments from property managers across 5 states. A knock interrupted them. David entered with a thick file. You need to see this, Your Honor. We found Bennett's daughter. Rachel Bennett's statement was devastating. I haven't spoken to my mother in 15 years. After Dad died, her neighborhood watch activities became an obsession. She started teaching these seminars about protecting property values, but it was all code for. I couldn't take it anymore. Not after what she did to my best friend's family. The investigation revealed a pattern stretching back decades. Bennett had refined her methods, teaching others how to harass legally. Document everything, but create the incidents yourself. Use code words, quality of life, instead of racial terms. File complaints just under the harassment threshold. Build a network of like-minded residents. Always maintain a perfect victim facade. Judge, David appeared again. Ms. Thompson is here. And you need to see this. Marissa Thompson walked in, still in her scrubs, carrying a laptop. The hospital department found something. Mrs. Bennett didn't know about our new parking lot cameras. The footage showed Bennett in the hospital parking lot at 2 a.m., slashing Thompson's tires. The timestamp: the night before their court hearing. I was in the middle of a trauma case, Thompson said quietly. A 10-year-old girl, car accident. When I finally got out, my car. I had to call an Uber. Almost missed the hearing. She knew I'd look unreliable if I was late. Judge Whitman watched Thompson's hands shake as she played the video. How did you keep going? Through all of this. Thompson's smile was tired but determined. My daughter. Every life I save in the ER. I couldn't let her win. But she took a deep breath. Yesterday, she followed my daughter home from school again. I can't take that risk. Detective Chen's phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she read the message. Judge, Bennett's been busy this morning. She just deposited $10,000 into her account. Payment for a consulting session with a property management company in Phoenix. She's teaching them her methods. Judge Whitman stood up, her decision crystal clear. Get me Judge Martinez. Now, Detective Chen, I want every piece of evidence ready for immediate review. David, contact the DA's office. She turned to Thompson. Miss Thompson, cancel any travel plans. Justice is about to get a lot faster than usual. The perfect victim's mask was about to shatter, and Eleanor Bennett would never see it coming. The security room at Oakwood Commons resembled a scene from a surveillance command center. 6 monitors displayed footage from different cameras, each telling a part of Eleanor Bennett's carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment. Watch this split screen, Detective Chen instructed, pointing to timestamps from the previous month. Left side shows Bennett entering Thompson's building at 2 a.m. Right side shows her own camera recording evidence of a party. But Thompson's apartment lights are clearly off. She's staging everything. Judge Whitman leaned closer, studying Bennett's movements. Show me the tire-slashing incident again. The footage rolled. Bennett, dressed in dark clothing, methodically puncturing Thompson's tires in the hospital parking lot. The timestamp matched perfectly with hospital records showing Thompson in surgery, saving a child's life. But here's where it gets worse, Detective Chen said, switching to a new file. We found her online payment records. She's been running what she calls community protection seminars. $2,000 per session, teaching other people her methods. A PowerPoint presentation appeared on screen, professionally designed with innocuous-looking titles. Maintaining property values through documentation. Legal strategies for community standards. Understanding code enforcement. But the subfolders told a different story. One document, titled Target Selection, read like a hunter's manual. Choose residents who work long hours. They're too exhausted to fight back effectively. Single parents are ideal. They lack support systems. Medical professionals make perfect targets. Their erratic schedules are easy to exploit. She has spreadsheets, David added, placing a laptop beside the monitors. Look at this. Tracking software, scheduling algorithms. She'd monitor Thompson's hospital shifts and coordinate her harassment for maximum impact. The data was chilling. Emergency room rotation schedules. School bus pickup times for Thompson's daughter. Security guard patrol patterns. Police response time averages. Detailed notes on Thompson's few visitors, labeled as potential witnesses to neutralize. 347 documented incidents, Detective Chen summarized. Each one carefully planned to fall just under the legal threshold for harassment, and she's teaching others to do the same. A new video began playing. Bennett conducting a private seminar in her living room. 5 other residents sat taking notes as she explained her methodology. Remember, Bennett's voice came through clearly. It's all about plausible deniability. We're not targeting anyone specific. We're just concerned citizens worried about neighborhood standards. Her air quotes were visible on camera. The courts can't touch you if you follow my system. Judge Whitman's phone buzzed. A message from the DA's office. They found more victims. 3 other hospitals, same pattern. Bennett specifically targets medical staff working night shifts. Judge. David appeared at the door, his face grave. Thompson's daughter is here. She recorded something on her phone yesterday. The young girl's video was shakily filmed from behind a bush. Bennett stood with 2 other residents, discussing their next targets. The Vietnamese family in 3B, the Hispanic nurse in 5C. Bennett's voice was calm, methodical. By Christmas, we'll have them all out. I've already lined up acceptable tenants to take their places. She patted her designer handbag. The management company pays a finder's fee for each replacement. Your Honor. Detective Chen's voice was urgent. There's one more thing. We found this in her storage unit. The final piece of evidence was a leather-bound ledger, meticulously documenting 20 years of systematic harassment. Names of targeted families, amounts collected from consulting fees, Lists of successful removals. Network of collaborators in multiple states. Property management companies paying for her services. Thompson's name was just the latest in a long list of lives Bennett had worked to destroy. Judge Whitman stood up, gathering the evidence files. Contact Judge Martinez and the FBI. This isn't just harassment anymore. It's organized criminal activity across state lines. She looked at Thompson's daughter's video one more time. And get me the housing authority. I want every property manager who hired Bennett investigated. As she walked to her chambers to prepare the emergency hearing documents, Judge Whitman passed Thompson in the hallway, still in her scrubs from another night shift. We have her, Whitman said quietly. All of it. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. My daughter. She can sleep safely tonight. Yes, Whitman promised. And Mrs. Bennett, she's about to discover what real justice feels like. The web of lies was unraveling, and its architect would soon face the consequences of her perfectly planned persecution. Courtroom 4B hummed with tension as Eleanor Bennett strode in, her designer heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. She wore a pale blue suit that had been carefully chosen to emphasize her apparent fragility, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. The practiced mask of elderly vulnerability was firmly in place until she saw the FBI agents flanking the entrance. Mrs. Bennett, Judge Whitman's voice cut through the whispers. Please approach the bench. Bennett's steps faltered when she noticed Marissa Thompson sitting at the prosecutor's table, still in her surgical scrubs, having come straight from saving a life in the ER. Beside her sat Detective Chen, surrounded by stacks of evidence files and multiple laptops. What is this? Bennett's voice trembled, but this time, the tremor was real. I thought this was about a noise complaint appeal. Oh, it's about much more than noise, Mrs. Bennett. Judge Whitman's tone was steel wrapped in silk. Would you like to explain these? The courtroom screens flickered to life, displaying the security footage. Bennett setting up speakers, slashing tires, following Thompson's daughter. The perfectly crafted mask began to crack. Those videos are clearly doctored, Bennett protested, but her eyes darted toward the exit where more FBI agents now stood. I'm the victim here. Are you? Judge Whitman pressed a button, and Bennett's own voice filled the courtroom from her tutorial videos. Asterisk target their children first. Once they feel their kids aren't safe, they'll run. The color drained from Bennett's face. Her designer handbag slipped from trembling fingers, spilling its contents. Among the scattered items, a small camera tumbled out, identical to those found hidden throughout the apartment complex. Your Honor, I can explain, Bennett started, but Judge Whitman wasn't finished. Perhaps you can explain this. Another video played. Bennett teaching her methods to other residents, accepting cash payments, detailing her harassment strategies. Or these. Images of her detailed spreadsheets appeared, tracking Thompson's hospital shifts, her daughter's movements. Something snapped in Bennett's carefully maintained facade. You don't understand, she shrieked, her mask of gentility shattering completely. These people, they're ruining everything. I'm protecting our community. That woman, she jabbed a finger at Thompson. She doesn't belong here. None of them do. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened. Rachel Bennett, Eleanor's estranged daughter, walked in with a thick folder. Hello, Mother, she said quietly. Eleanor Bennett's composure crumbled entirely. You ungrateful. She lunged toward Thompson, years of hatred exploding to the surface. This is all your fault. In the chaos that followed, Bennett's designer wig flew off, revealing what Detective Chen had suspected. A network of miniature cameras sewn into the lining, recording everything, always building her false cases. Mrs. Bennett, Judge Whitman's gavel crack echoed like a gunshot. One more move and I'll add assaulting a medical professional to your charges. Thompson stood calm in the storm, her voice steady as she addressed the court. Last night, while Mrs. Bennett was plotting to destroy my life, I was performing emergency surgery on a 6-year-old car crash victim. The mother thanked me this morning. She never knew that while I was saving her child, my own daughter was being terrorized. Tears streamed down Thompson's face, but her voice never wavered. I spent months living in fear, doubting myself, watching my daughter afraid to play outside. All because I had the audacity to be a black woman who succeeded in life. The evidence mounted. Bennett's journals detailing 20 years of systematic harassment, bank records showing hundreds of thousands in consultation fees, victims from multiple states stepping forward via video link to tell their stories. Eleanor Bennett, Judge Whitman's voice cut through the chaos. You are hereby remanded into federal custody pending multiple charges of criminal harassment, conspiracy, wire fraud, and civil rights violations. As FBI agents approached with handcuffs, Bennett made one last desperate attempt. But I'm just a poor old woman. You can't. Save it for the federal judge, Whitman interrupted. And Mrs. Bennett, your Academy Award-worthy performance days are over. Thompson watched as Bennett was led away, then turned to her daughter who had slipped into the courtroom. They embraced, both crying and laughing at once. Is it really over, Mom? The girl whispered. Yes, baby, Thompson smiled through her tears. We won. We finally won. The perfect victim had become the perfect defendant. And justice, at last, was colorblind. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation on sentencing day. 3 months of trials had exposed a network of discrimination that stretched across 5 states, with Eleanor Bennett as its architect. The press filled the gallery, their presence marking the significance of a case that had captured national attention. Judge Martinez's courtroom fell silent as Eleanor Bennett was led in, her designer clothes replaced by prison orange, her carefully styled silver hair now showing dark roots. Gone were the affected tremors and fragile demeanor. Bitterness had etched hard lines around her mouth. Marissa Thompson sat in the front row, holding her daughter's hand. Behind them sat a dozen other victims of Bennett's community preservation campaign. Nurses, doctors, first responders, all minorities who had endured systematic harassment while serving their communities. Before we proceed with sentencing, Judge Martinez began. The court will hear victim impact statements. Dr. Thompson. Thompson squeezed her daughter's hand and approached the podium. Her surgical scrubs were replaced by a professional suit, but the emergency room ID still hung around her neck. She would head straight to her shift after the hearing. Your Honor, Thompson's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. Mrs. Bennett didn't just harass me. She tried to break my spirit. During the height of her campaign, I performed 16 emergency surgeries. I saved lives while she plotted to destroy mine. She turned to face Bennett directly. You slashed my tires the night I was operating on a child injured in a car crash. You followed my daughter home while I was treating gunshot victims in the ER. You called me, her voice caught, horrible names while I was giving CPR to someone's grandmother. Bennett's jaw clenched, but she didn't look up. But here's what you didn't break, Thompson continued, stronger now. You didn't break my dedication to saving lives. You didn't break my daughter's brightness. You didn't break our dignity. And you didn't break our right to live wherever we choose. Other victims stepped forward. Dr. Chen from Riverside. I delivered babies while you vandalized my car. Nurse Rodriguez from Phoenix. I treated COVID patients while you taught others to terrorize my family. Dr. Williams from Atlanta. I performed heart surgery while you poisoned my garden. The pattern was the same. Dedicated medical professionals targeted during their most demanding shifts, their children harassed while they saved lives. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence one final time. 20 years of documented harassment. 47 families driven from their homes. $1.2 million in consulting fees from discriminatory property managers. Hundreds of hours of tutorial videos teaching others her methods. A network of students continuing her work in multiple states. Eleanor Bennett, the judge's voice was stern. You have orchestrated one of the most sophisticated campaigns of racial harassment this court has ever seen. You targeted those who serve our communities at their most vulnerable moments. You weaponized your privilege and knowledge of the legal system to inflict maximum damage while avoiding consequences. Bennett finally spoke, her voice hard. I was protecting property values. These people, Judge Martinez interrupted, save lives. While you were plotting their destruction, they were performing surgeries, delivering babies, treating the sick. The only person devaluing our community was you. The sentence came down like thunder. 15 years in federal prison. $2.5 million in restitution to victims. Permanent ban from property management and residential associations. Mandatory racial sensitivity training. All tutorial materials to be used in civil rights training to identify and prevent similar schemes. As Bennett was led away, Thompson turned to find Judge Whitman in the gallery. Thank you, Thompson whispered, for seeing through her act. Whitman smiled softly. I was wrong that first day. I'm making it right now. She handed Thompson an envelope. The hospital board saw your testimony. They're offering you a position as Chief of Emergency Medicine. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. But my record shows that you performed life-saving surgeries while under extreme duress. Whitman finished. They want someone that strong leading their ER. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Thompson and her daughter descended the steps. A young journalist called out, Dr. Thompson, what would you say to others facing discrimination? Thompson looked at her daughter, then at the crowd. Justice may take time, but truth always comes to light. And to those who think they can break us, watch us rise. The perfect victim had become the perfect victor, and somewhere in a prison cell, Eleanor Bennett was finally learning what real justice felt like. 1 year later, the Oakwood Commons courtyard bloomed with decorated tables and festive banners, celebrating the community's first annual Unity Festival. Children of all backgrounds played together on the newly installed playground, their laughter a stark contrast to the fearful silence that had once permeated the complex. Dr. Marissa Thompson, now Chief of Emergency Medicine at Memorial General, stood at a podium addressing the gathered residents. She'd just finished a 12-hour shift, but spoke with energetic purpose, her hospital ID badge catching the sunlight. 1 year ago, this community was divided by hate, she began, her daughter beaming proudly from the front row. Today, we're showing the world what happens when justice wins and communities unite. The changes went far beyond Oakwood Commons. Thompson's case had sparked a national movement. The Thompson Act had passed through Congress, making systematic housing discrimination a federal crime. A nationwide audit of property management companies had exposed similar schemes in 12 states. Medical professionals had formed an advocacy group, Healers for Housing Justice. A documentary about the case was winning awards at film festivals. Judge Whitman, seated among the residents, smiled as she remembered the day everything changed. Her phone buzzed. Another update from the Justice Department. 3 more of Bennett's students had been indicted, their discriminatory networks dismantled before they could fully form. Mom, Thompson's daughter called out, running up with a local newspaper. The headline read, Former Judge Bennett denied parole. No remorse shown for discriminatory actions. Thompson hugged her daughter close, remembering darker days. But today was about celebration. The apartment complex had transformed. Security cameras now protected residents instead of targeting them. A community council represented all racial and ethnic groups. Monthly cultural festivals celebrated diversity. A mentorship program paired medical students with local children. The former Bennett Network properties had become model communities for integration. Dr. Thompson, a young resident approached nervously. I just got accepted to nursing school. Your story, it gave me courage. Thompson smiled, remembering her own journey. She'd not only survived Bennett's harassment, but had turned it into a platform for change. Her emergency room had become a beacon of diversity, her hiring practices ensuring that the medical staff reflected the community they served. The celebration continued as evening fell. Judge Whitman joined Thompson at a quiet table, watching the festivities. Sometimes I still feel guilty, Whitman admitted. That first day in court. You made it right, Thompson interrupted gently. "And look what happened because you did." They watched as residents shared dishes from different cultures. Children taught each other games from their heritage, and former victims of housing discrimination now served as community leaders. A group of medical professionals, all minorities who'd faced similar harassment, gathered near the playground. They were part of Thompson's new initiative, a legal defense fund for healthcare workers facing discrimination. The fund had already helped 20 families fight back against housing bias. Dr. Thompson, David, Judge Whitman's former clerk, now a civil rights attorney, approached with news. The last of Bennett's properties has been converted to fair housing, and her tutorial videos, they're being used in law schools to teach future attorneys how to identify and fight systematic discrimination. The sun set over Oakwood Commons, string lights twinkling in the growing dusk. Thompson's daughter had organized a talent show, and children from every background performed together, a sight unimaginable just 1 year ago. "Mom," her daughter said later, as they walked home through their transformed community, "remember when we used to be scared to walk here?" Thompson hugged her close. "Now look at you. Student council president, volunteer coordinator, and you're applying to medical school next year." They passed Bennett's old apartment, now home to a young interracial couple who'd recently had twins. The wife was a surgeon Thompson had mentored. The husband taught at the local high school. The ripple effect, Judge Whitman had called it during her last visit. One act of justice leading to a wave of positive change. As Thompson prepared for another night shift at the ER, she paused to watch the last children leaving the playground. Their laughter echoed through the courtyard, drowning out the final ghostly whispers of Eleanor Bennett's hatred. The perfect victim had become the perfect catalyst for change, and somewhere in a prison cell, Bennett was learning that love would always triumph over hate.